Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at the goldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. The theme for today's show is preparing for the transfer of ownership to the rising generation. We'll be covering some of the answers to why it's so important for families to adequately prepare for the transfer of ownership, the difference between ownership succession and leadership succession, the biggest mistakes families make when preparing for ownership transfer, and key elements of preparing for the transfer of ownership to the rising generation. My guest today is Dan Frosh, who is the director at the Merrill Center for Family Wealth, where he works with enterprising families to help empower them to navigate the complexities of wealth and family dynamics to help achieve enduring multi-generational success. Dan is an attorney and previously served as a senior advisor at Cambridge Family Enterprise Group, a global organization founded in 1989 by Dr. John Davis, who had a small office at USC School of Business in 1988 when I was getting my MBA and knocking on his door to talk about family businesses. Dan writes and speaks internationally on family enterprises and family wealth, and is the co-author with Andrew Heyer from Cambridge Family Enterprise Group about preparing for the transfer of ownership, to be released soon under the title Business, Families, and Family Businesses, the STEP Handbook for Advisors. Dan is the current Board of Directors Vice Chair of the Family Firm Institute, a global network of thought leaders in the family enterprise field, and serves as the consulting editor for Family Firm Institute Practitioner, a publication that features thought-provoking analysis, trends, and research affecting professionals in the family enterprise community. Dan, that is an incredible bio. You are a young man, and you are probably an amazing go-to resource. Merrill's lucky to have you, and welcome to the show. I'm lucky to have you here today.
Wow, thank you, Jonathan. You're too kind, but it's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right, so everyone I ask kind of what's your backstory, so listeners can get an idea of how you got here. What was your path? Didn't you love law? Why did you quit that? Sometimes we'll make jokes about lawyers because everyone likes those. But really, how did you come to this work? What was your background? What brought you here?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's such a great question for everybody who works in this field, and everybody has such a unique answer of how they got into this work. And I think mine is relatively unique as well. I was attending law school and was just looking for kind of a job on the side to help cover some of the expenses of law school. And I actually ended up working at the Family Firm Institute, serving as their director of educational programming. And it was really through that experience and really working with Judy Green, who's the president of FFI, or the Family Firm Institute, that I really started to see that my legal education could really equip me well to work in this field. And the whole reason I wanted to be a lawyer was to help people and help families. I was focused very much on estate planning in law school, and I realized that if you help a family with their estate plan, you've helped one piece of the puzzle. But in working in the field of family enterprises and helping them, you're working on a much bigger puzzle. And I just found that far more fascinating, far more fulfilling and challenging. So then after graduating from law school, I decided to forego practicing law and to dive right into becoming a family business advisor.
That's great. Now, Cambridge Family Enterprise Group is a pretty illustrious, I don't know what the word would be to describe them, but they're a global firm. They have a lot of people. John Davis was a Harvard PhD. I guess he was getting his master's when he was at USC and I was there. And um, that firm is really working with large family businesses across the globe. So that was quite an opportunity to score time working with them, I imagine.
Without a doubt, yeah, I really valued my time with Cambridge, working with John, working with Andrew Heyer, and the other partners who are yeah, so well versed and thought leaders in the field. It was really, I consider myself very fortunate to have had the opportunity to learn from them.
Well, good. So now you're at Merrill, which has a Center for
Yes.
Family Wealth. And as a person who's long been a Bank of America and has recently again become a Merrill client, Merrill, of course, being a Bank of America company, um, I see what my advisor does in terms of providing a concierge level of service for high net worth individuals. Um, that would, I guess, be me, but I'm not really high net worth nor ultra high net worth. But like you guys are really working with some ultra high net worth and high net worth families providing incredible stuff. What exactly does the Merrill Center for Family Wealth do?
Yeah, it's another great question. And yeah, at the Center for Family Wealth, really what we're trying to do, we recognize that especially for ultra high net worth families, wealth brings a lot of complexity. It brings some great opportunities, but also a lot of complexity. And while Merrill advisors are so good at helping to manage the wealth of the family, there's more on the quantitative side. The qualitative side also needs some attention as well. And that's really where we come in and help families navigate this complexity and empower them to be really intentional about the way that their wealth impacts themselves individually, their families, their communities, and society as a whole. And we do so through a variety of ways, working individually with families, educate them about these family governance concepts, also working with members of the rising generation to develop the skills that they'll need to continue to manage that wealth from one generation to the next. So, at a high level, that's what we're engaged in, and there's a great team around the country who all contributes to the success of the center and the Merrill company as a whole.
And when you work with clients, are you working as a team with clients? And do each of you have different disciplines or areas of expertise, or um, do you more or less have a similar knowledge base and work more individually with a company and a family?
Yeah, we tend to, it varies. I think as with most teams, some engagements we may work individually. Other engagements we like to collaborate. I always think there's a lot of benefit in teamwork, multidisciplinary approach, and just having different sets of eyes on the same issues to really come up with a more holistic solution for the family. So we work kind of both individually and as a team. And I think our team brings a lot of diverse experiences and backgrounds and skill sets to these issues.
All right, so let's get into talking a little bit about the role of the rising gen, which I call next gen, by the way, probably the same thing, and the role
Yes.
that they create in the role that these rising generation have in creating the family's vision for the future. And as you know, like the author and podcast host of Disruptive Successor, I'm all about the younger generation kind of like grabbing the baton
Mhm.
or taking the baton out of the predecessor's hands and showing them, as I coach them up, that they have a big vision and it might be bigger than what their parents had. And so I think that what's so important is to get them all on all the, you know, in my case, it's usually one and two generations. Your larger families is getting maybe multiple generations and cousins and things like that to align around the vision for the future. So I think that, as I'm talking to you, I'm kind of almost wondering, so do the rising generation feel more comfortable with you because of your age, that you're more their demographic? And like, is some of the challenges just developing trust with us as advisors? And the trust comes from, it's an age similarity or an experience similarity. So, I mean, let's just share your thoughts on maybe some of the challenges and why it's so important to align on a vision.
Sure, sure. Maybe I'll address your kind of last question first, and then
Hmm.
I'll move to the vision. But yes, I think it is so important when you work with any family that you develop some level of relationship with them. Certainly, kind of with the foundation of trust and credibility. And yeah, to some degree, I've found that rising generation family members or next generation family members may feel a bit more comfortable sharing their experiences with somebody who's a little bit closer in age. Whether they're right or wrong, I think that they perceive that I might understand a little bit more of the challenges that they're facing than older advisors. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I have found it to be helpful in connecting with them, and I think it's so important to really build that connection with the family to be able to help them. So that's, I guess, to answer that piece of your question.
Yeah, and by the
Moving
way,
on.
I'm actually a boomer, but I think of myself as a young person, so I like to connect and relate more to the younger people. So,
Yeah,
I don't find
absolutely.
there's any disconnect between me and them. I just find
Yes.
the disconnect is usually that the family members are not talking to each other,
Mhm.
and that
It's
is the
it's
knot
so
that
true.
needs to be unwound. Right.
It's so true, and I think it really shows itself in the vision,
Hmm.
where one generation may have a clear vision of what they want the future of the enterprise to be, and the next generation may have a completely different vision. And if they're not talking, if they're not aligning between the generations, then the succession planning and how you pass ownership to the next generation becomes a much messier process if expectations for the future are not aligned about what that enterprise could be in the future. So that's one of the reasons why I find it so important that there needs to be cross-generational collaboration in drafting and creating that vision for the future.
One of the problems, as I've said many times on this show before, and I use the farm analogy, is young people, they don't have that much to lose. So they're willing to bet the farm. Older people have a lot more to lose. They don't want to bet the farm. And literally betting the farm, the old analogy of where the farmer would go to the bank and need to borrow from the bank so that they could, you know, get through a difficult crop season. This is where I think some of the challenge lies, is that the younger gen wants to maybe invest in real estate or equipment or additional leases, capital expenditures that put the business at not necessarily higher risk, but now it may be a higher burn, so it's got to recapture that. And the older person is used to collecting a check, um, which at some point sometimes feels like a coupon to the younger people, and they don't want that compensation or that equity to be disrupted. I think that's part of the problem in getting on the same page.
Yeah, it certainly can be, and I think it calls out another important element of preparing for that generational transition and empowering the rising gen a bit more to make these decisions or be involved in the decision making processes. And it's somewhat on the, I think, the senior generation to educate and provide opportunities for the next generation to be exposed to the business, to really understand what the business is, how the family makes money through the business or through other investments, and to really understand what these decisions mean. Because I think you're right. I think inherently the rising generation may have a different risk profile than their parents or grandparents' generation. But I think they need to understand a bit about how the business is structured, what has worked well in the past. And of course, there's room to innovate and to change things to keep up with, a very turbulent economic environment that we're in. But I think when you kind of make the foundation of these conversations, the family's values, this is what we believe in, these are our principles, and use that to help explain how decisions are made in the business and about the business, that can be incredibly powerful as well to align both generations on the future.
Do you believe that the families should have a set of values and the company, the business has a set of values and they're distinctly different, the family values and the business values?
Yes, I do believe that there should be a separate set of values for the family, as that's one distinct culture, and one for the business, as that's a distinct culture. The only place maybe I'm nitpicking here is I don't think they should be distinctly different. They should be aligned. The family's values should be somewhat seen in the business's values,
Hmm.
but of course, given the differences in culture, where a family kind of has unconditional love for its members, more egalitarian approaches. Oftentimes, you see those values reflected by the family. And then in the business, where there's obviously a need for profit and less egalitarian, more merit based
Hmm.
decisions and values, sometimes you see those little differences. But fundamentally, those core values should align.
Interesting. Okay. So let's talk about the skills and knowledge that the next gen needs to be effective future owners, and also the strategies that can help these rising gen prepare themselves to be owners. And I just want to, as I'm reflecting on this set of this topic, I see two scenarios that are most common. One, where a young child, preteen and in teen years, gets involved in the business and sees it from like they're riding around in the truck or they're in the factory or they're on that. So they see from the way the parents or the way dad in most cases ran the business, and they have that perspective. And then they get sort of sometime in their 20s, they're like, this could be done differently, this could be done better, we could be bigger, and they have that vision. Or I don't want any part of this, this is not my thing. Or the other set is where someone never thought they were going into the business. They went off to, college to get a professional education, and then suddenly they either were needed or they saw the opportunity to come into the business. They saw it as a better opportunity than
Mhm.
slugging it out in corporate, and they came in having already had some really good like work experience and brought some value to the business. So what are your thoughts on skills and knowledge and strategies to prepare these people to be owners?
Yes, definitely. And I think this topic doesn't get enough attention. I think that in general, skill building and helping the next generation develop into employees in the business is one that gets a lot of attention. But how to train them and develop the rising generation into good owners is a completely different set of skills. And one that I think gets ignored or doesn't get the attention it deserves enough. And I think those skills there are a variety of skills that you need to be a good owner. And those include, basic financial skills. Individually, as an owner, you need to have your own personal finances kind of in check. You need to understand how to borrow, how to budget, how to spend, how to invest, and so forth, so that you're not overly reliant on the business for profits and for your own personal bank accounts.
Hmm.
In addition to that, I think there are a few other skills. Some are around wealth structures at the Merrill Center for Family Wealth. We talk a lot about these skills that owners need for the future. And on the wealth side, it's not just the financial wealth, but it's really looking at understanding the structures that are in place and the network of advisors and professionals that these family members have to rely on to help with with the ownership and with wealth. So I think that's an important skill set to develop. There's also important governance skills, which are both understanding how to make decisions effectively, how to communicate with your family members about the wealth and about the business. And then also for families who own businesses, there's a whole nother set of skills that you need, especially around ownership. You need to basically understand how to read and understand financial statements. You need to understand what's happening in the business, how it's performing, even if you're not an employee, even if you're not on the board of directors. But in order to really be effective in the role of an owner, you need to understand how the business is performing within the industry too. And that's a whole nother set of skills that requires some attention as well. And then in terms of how rising generation family members can obtain these skills, I think you've mentioned a few great examples, which is when you're young, exposure to the business can be incredibly valuable. I often hear about families we work with. We ask the rising generation, what do you know about the business? And oftentimes we hear stories of, well, as a kid, we would go there on the weekends, or we would always go there throughout the week. And my dad would take me around and I'd get to meet all the managers and all the people who worked there. And then by the time I was, graduating from college, I already understood what the business was, who the key personnel was outside of our family. And so I think that's viewed as more of an informal kind of experience, but it's incredibly valuable and a great place to start this skill development with the next generation. I think there are a few other kind of more intentional ways that rising generation family members can get this experience as well and these skills. One, I was working with a family, and this was a G2 going into G3 family. And at this point, only one member of G3 was working in the business. And I think he had five or six siblings and cousins who were not involved, and they knew very little about the business, but they were about to receive ownership and become owners and start to work, in that role. And so one of the strategies we employed is to pair up some of the cousins to go out and learn more about the business. They had, I think, three or four different distinct business units, and each one took one of the business units, went in, interviewed the head of that business unit, learned more about it, how they make money, what the challenges that business is facing, who the key personnel were outside the family. And they came back and reported to their cousins on what they had learned. And it was both a great way for them to learn about the business itself, but also to really learn about teamwork and how to become a cohesive set of cousin owners. And I think things like that, and you can get very creative. I've also seen families who use case studies. Let's come up with a case study and we're going to give it to the next generation. You guys work through these challenges and present back on how you would have approached these challenges and solved that problem. That's also a great way. And then another, I guess the last strategy I'll share is one that I think a lot of people are familiar with, which is using observers and making it available for rising generation family members to sit in on board meetings, to sit in on some other meetings and observe and see how the board functions. And through that experience, really learning what they can bring to the table and the important job that it is, not only as a board member, but as an owner or an employee of the business to keep that business moving forward.
Well, that's a lot to unpack there, and I
I
don't
guess
know
it
that
is,
I
yes.
go back and address any of them. Some of the topics I've covered in other episodes, and I think that ones from my experience that just don't get enough attention, you just gave a little bit of touch into, which was about running meetings, making
Mhm.
decision making. I mean, really, have you ever taken a course? I don't think I have on decision-making styles and methods. I mean, you can find it
Mm.
online. You can go online, but I mean, these are areas that I see some families struggle. Obviously,
Yes.
communication. We all know that that's an issue. Um, but how to identify, discuss, and solve issues. um, becomes problems. The financial stuff, obviously, you can go to school and learn all that stuff. It's conflict in the workplace that's a little bit more difficult, and definitely more difficult in family businesses, and
Yes.
conflict around decisions. And so having a framework about, some kind of a decision-making framework that you would use to decide on, do we invest? Do we go forward? Do we go into new markets? Do we out for new products? Do we deal with that customer? Do we transfer equity? Do we compensate family members better? All these things, there probably are decision frameworks that would help family businesses. So good
Yeah,
stuff.
and there's no substitute for practice. And that I think is a lot of what these strategies go to is let's practice making decisions. At the Merrill Center for Family Wealth, we also set up things called safe to fail experiments.
Hmm.
Make it so that the stakes aren't so high, give the rising generation the opportunity to try something. And if it doesn't work out, the consequences aren't going to be so significant, but that's really the best opportunity to learn and put those practices that you're talking about into use.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to ask you to give our listeners a primer on governance, talking about generational transition and when's a good time. And like, the first question that comes to mind is, at what point, what's the size of the business, or how many generations are involved, or at what point do we start talking about and even using the word governance? That, by the way, that word alone is
Mhm.
probably a frightening word to a lot of entrepreneurs, because a lot of entrepreneurs seem to hate government. And so you use the term governance. Now you're saying you want to put government in, like you want us to create our own government in our business. That sounds like really scary. So give
Yes,
us a primer on the subject.
happy to. And maybe I can start, and this may lower the tension that people feel around the term governance, which is that the origins of the word governance really comes from a Greek word that means to steer. And I
Mm,
think when you think about it through that lens, steering the family business feels a little bit maybe more appropriate in early generations. There's not as
yes.
much formality in that word. But I think it's important. And I think the way this all kind of fits together is that I think governance happens at every stage of a family business, whether it is a founder who starts it and the founder or controlling owner is making all of the decisions inherently. That is governance.
Hmm.
Then, when you move to the second generation, or often what's referred to as the sibling partnership, now you have a group of siblings who grew up together, know each other well. Now they need to make decisions, but it needs to be collaborative and inclusive among those siblings. And then, of course, when you get into the next generation, often referred to as the cousin consortium, now you have a larger, more diverse family. In-laws have been integrated typically in the second generation. So now you're bringing in other families' values into the way that these cousins are raised in G3 and beyond. And that sometimes requires a different form of governance, perhaps with a little bit more formality. Maybe it's representative governance at this point if there are too many owners involved. There's a lot of options, but I think to your point about the primer and how this all fits together is that as you're preparing to transfer ownership from one generation to the next, that is really the opportune time to review the governance that you have in place and think about the future. And is our current system of governance really appropriate and well suited to the needs of that next generation? So I think that's really the emphasis here is use that opportunity. And maybe you look at it and say, we're still relatively small and cohesive as a family. Our current level of governance will work just fine. Or maybe you're getting into a more complicated scenario where you say, I think we need to make some adjustments. It doesn't need to be revolutionary, but let's adjust it a little bit so that it can help meet the needs of a much larger group of owners in that next generation.
So what are some of the elements of a governance type of a structure? Is it, are we talking about a document, a constitution? Are we talking about, like, what are prompt? the listeners with what are some of the questions or the chapter headings if it was a book, on your business? Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. There are a few components to governance that I think most people are familiar with. The foundation of all governance is really those values, mission, and vision.
right.
That helps to kind of prompt the rest of the governance system. So that's an important component. Governance also, then, I like to think of it as it's both forums and groups of people, but and documents as well. On the forum side, especially in the ownership side of governance, and if we go back to John Davis's three circle model of family, business, and ownership, each circle, each system has its own governance forums and agreements and documents. So looking at the ownership circle here, really the key forums, there are really two. One is a shareholders forum or the shareholder group. And then oftentimes something referred to as an owners council, which is a representative group that works on behalf of that broader ownership group. Those are really the key forums. And then on the agreement side, yeah, you may have a very important document called the shareholder agreement. And that contains a lot about how decisions are going to be made. It contains information about if a lot of families want to restrict ownership to just be to stay in the bloodline. And the shareholders agreement can help them achieve this, as well as create some rules and processes for how ownership can pass from one generation to the next. So those are important components within that ownership agreement. Some businesses are owned in trust, and those trust documents are part of that ownership governance as well as maybe some corporate bylaws kind of straddle that ownership governance and business governance side of things.
I think this is complicated stuff for the the smaller entrepreneurial firm that is new to all this. And this is where they get stuck and they don't, I recently had someone come to me and said, we're talking about transferring ownership. And so I went to, I think it was, I went to a lawyer and the lawyer said, you need to go talk to your accountant but they don't know where to go or who to turn to for help. And,
Yes.
I mean, I could even imagine a very wealthy Bank of America client investing at Merrill that who seemingly has a pretty large asset base that doesn't maybe even know where to go on some of this stuff because perhaps they're what I call a technician business owner. They're so into being successful as an entrepreneur that they don't know this stuff. The same way that celebrities, people who maybe are high net worth, made a lot of money because of their expertise, they don't understand this kind of stuff. They don't know
Yeah,
how to plan it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you see, yeah, the skills required to make money, to launch an entrepreneurial venture are different than the skills required to keep it moving from generation to
Yes.
generation. And I think you're right. And I think, that is where groups like the Center for Family Wealth in Merrill or Cambridge or these other consulting firms can really help families and kind of serve, because I think you're right. I think if you go to an attorney, you get a legal answer. If you go to an accountant, you get an accountant's answer. But I think when it comes to a family enterprise where there are so many systems at play with each other, there's the family side of things, the business side, and so forth. That complexity requires, I think, a more holistic approach to this. And that's where I think family business advisors in particular can be helpful for families. I would also just say that, and John Davis has this great quote about how structure is your friend as a business owner. And I think expanding on that, it's about appropriate structure for the business and looking at that, the needs of a first generation or a founder, an entrepreneur, are going to be different than a fifth or sixth generation family enterprise with hundreds of shareholders. At that point, the family lives either all around the country or all around the world. So I think the structures that they would need to help organize all of this are going to be different than those that are required in earlier stage family businesses. So some of this can feel very complex, but I think the important thing to take away is that ownership should be designed to fit the needs of the business as it is now and looking maybe 5 or 10 years into the future. And then, of course, governance, like everything, should be reviewed regularly to make sure that it's still meeting the needs of the family and the next generation.
And so, do you find that there's a common quarterback as a professional type, whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, an insurance person, a wealth manager? I mean, is there a common or a family advisor? Is there, I guess, a common quarterback in all this? Like, so, right, we're talking about, let's just recap a little bit, going
Mhm.
from controlling owner to sibling partnerships to cousin consortiums. Now we've got maybe an owner's council in addition to a management team, in addition
Mhm.
to a leadership team, right? And then the owner's council, if I understand correctly, that just is a subset of maybe the shareholders. I'm not exactly sure.
Oftentimes, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and now, we've got lawyers drafting shareholder agreements. I mean, so like in order of, from your perspective, in order of priority, who's the quarterback, or who's the person that is really running most of this for family businesses?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think the complexity that you've just outlined highlights, number one, the need for good coordination among all of these aspects. And oftentimes we see it's a family champion who steps up and kind of helps serve as that coordinator among the different forums and groups. I think there's also,
So
I
an
mean, to some
individual from the business, you mean, and the family, is that what you're saying? Or no?
could be. It
Yep.
could be, a
Okay.
family champion, could be a family leader in the business. It could be an influential family member who's not involved in the
Okay.
business.
Good point.
Um, but I also think there's some degree of need to certainly coordinate everything, but also uh, in these families, we're listing all these different groups, but the population of those groups, the family members who are in each group, may be the same. And
Mhm.
especially in early stage family enterprises, the family members who work in the business may also sit on the board and may also have ownership interests. So the owners council, the board, and the company become almost the same group. But in that
Just
situation, we just like to call out the importance of setting and designing agendas that really focus on these different components. What hat are you wearing in each meeting? As a board, when the board meets, you put on your board hat and you think of it as a board member. On a day-to-day basis, you're thinking of it as a family employee. You're both a family member and an employee. But then we also think it's important to have meetings of owners who are wearing their ownership hat and getting up to the altitude that owners should have, looking at the business, looking at the enterprise, looking at the industry. And even if you're the same group of family members in each of those meetings, make sure that the agenda is clear, what hat you're wearing, and what type of topics and issues you are talking about during that meeting.
clearly it can be convoluted. I know when I get there, usually I start working with a company, family business. It's convoluted as to what role they're playing, what hat they're wearing, and just separating out those different meetings and identifying them as an owner's meeting, a manager's meeting, a leader's meeting, shareholders meeting, super important. And
Absolutely.
and it helps for them to with a proper agenda, like you said, to stay on track and to put it into the right, into the right medium, the right forum.
Mhm.
So collaboration, super key for smooth ownership transition. Um, where do you see some of the hiccups in your work, working with clients? What are some of the biggest mistakes they make trying to make this transition?
Yeah, and I think collaboration when it relates to planning for the transition of ownership from one generation to the next. I think there are kind of two forms of collaboration. One is cross-generational. And again, for all the reasons we've discussed, I think it's so important to have members of the senior generation and the next generation both involved, maybe not equally, but they both need to be involved in this process, as I think you've alluded to, and so many others have, of looking at it as a baton passing uh, between from one generation to the next. And as you know, when you watch a relay race, both runners are running together for a period of time. And if one runner is just standing still, waiting for the baton to come, they're going to get passed immediately. It needs to be both generations moving together in this process. And I think that's one form of collaboration. I think the other form of collaboration is looking not only as a business, but looking at the entire enterprise and collaborating between the family employees and family leaders of the business, collaborating with those who are not active in the business, and bringing along other family members who are owners but not active in the business. So I think collaboration as a whole is such an important topic here. And I think where I've seen families go wrong with this area is one, obviously, I think where you see senior generation family members who are reluctant to bring the next generation or rising generation into the discussions, kind of adopting this mentality of I'm the owner, they're not an owner yet, so I will decide and I will tell them what will happen. I think that obviously fails to bring the next generation along. And at that point, they're inheriting or they're being gifted an enterprise that they might not totally agree with. And that's, of course, where aligning on the vision becomes really important as well. So I think that's one pitfall that I've seen a lot. The other big component here, and it's a little bit about collaboration, but maybe a broader point as well, is oftentimes, I think, especially when we talk about passing ownership from one generation to the next, families look at this as a legal process, as basic estate planning, and they approach it in that way. They go to an estate planning lawyer who puts together an ownership succession plan that is purely driven by tax planning motivations. And certainly, while tax planning is an important aspect of this, it is not the only aspect. And I think here there needs to be collaboration between lawyers, accountants, and the family, and oftentimes maybe a family business advisor who can help take on that more holistic approach to look at maybe some of those other family considerations that should go into these decisions as well. And so I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls is I think passing a business from one generation to the next only based on taxes fails to kind of take into consideration the family side of the business and what the family members really want and need out of this.
Great stuff, Dan. Um, yeah. So tell us the book the chapter that you co-authored, Business Families and Family Businesses, the STEP Handbook for Advisors. What does STEP stand for, and when will it be coming out?
Yes, thank you. STEP stands for the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, and they co-published this handbook along with Globe Law and Business. It'll be coming out in the next few months. I think you can pre-order the book now. And of course, I want to thank my co-author, Andrew Heyer, not just for his contributions on the chapter, but as one of my mentors, helping me learn and understand a lot about ownership, the ownership component of family enterprises, and working with families.
Sounds like you're doing a great job over there. I've said to many people that the role of a business coach is to accelerate revenue growth, value creation. But then you need a wealth manager who's going to compound that value, the wealth
Yes.
that you've created, and then with a family wealth manager, then you'll need someone who can help you transition it or transfer it, sorry, to the next generations and maintain as much of it as possible. So, and then you
Yes.
have your lawyers and your accountants that will do other things that will distribute the value and protect the value. So I call these the four horsemen in my book. And you need each one, you need each one of them to really be successful. So.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, well, thanks for being on the show. We look forward to your book coming out. And any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I just wanted to thank you. This has been such a pleasure. I enjoyed our conversation.
Great. Where can people reach you if they want to find out more about you or what's going on at Merrill?
Sure, I can be reached. I guess email is probably the easiest way. Daniel.frosh, Frosh, at ml.com.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Daniel, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Folks, please share this episode with someone who is going through some ownership transition and needs to understand the different elements that are at play here and maybe the minefields or the holes in their thinking. It's so important. What Dan has provided us with today is a holistic approach to it. So if you got some good value from this, share this episode with that person and like us on your podcast listening application of choice, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.